Well, let's get more reaction on this story now. And the joint CEO of steel manufacturer at Rand York Casting is Justin Corbett, who joins us from Durban this evening. Mr. Corbett, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. Firstly, let's get your reaction on the news that ArcelorMittal South Africa is likely to close shop. Is that devastating news, at least for your business?
Absolutely, it's devastating. I think we'd rather look at the country than our business immediately. I think they're talking about a loss of 3,500 jobs, but I think if we look at the country as a whole, and this is a review that was initiated last year when we got the first sort of warning of the possible closure, there were 18 industry associations that looked at the immediate and then the sort of medium-term implications in terms of job losses. And if you look at it, we expect in the short term to lose additional 30,000 jobs in South Africa, and in the medium term, at least 100,000 jobs. So when you're talking about 3,500, it's really the tip of the iceberg. And that's in terms of job losses, but there's an entire discussion that we can have on the deindustrialization that's taking place and the implications, the economic implications of that in South Africa.
Yeah, we'll talk more on the impact of this on the country trying to re-industrialize, because I think you have your finger on the pulse there. But let's talk firstly about your specific business. How many people do you employ as Rand York Casting, and how big an impact will this have if indeed ArcelorMittal South Africa does close shop?
Absolutely, it'll be dramatic. If you look at the entire portfolio of steel that's made in South Africa, ArcelorMittal is certainly the most complex steel maker in terms of their capability. They've got vacuum degassing, they've got magnetic stirring, they've got the ability to make complex microalloyed steels. And it goes back for various historical reasons and maybe well into the apartheid years, where through isolation, the country was obliged to develop its steel industry. If we look at the industry as a whole, and we look at my company, but also other companies, we'd go as far as saying that, and this is substantiated through the research that they did early on in the year, that as much as 32%, or approximately 450,000 tons of steel, which is unique to ArcelorMittal, and is not being made by the other mills in the country. We've got some mills that are definitely upscaling and upgrading the capability, but right now, Rand York and other companies in South Africa are going to be faced with broken supply chains and a very, very, very difficult situation in terms of continuity. We specialize in the mining and the civil sector, and we work very closely with very capable other mills in South Africa to keep the supply chains going. But we have some unique products which right now no one has the capability of manufacturing, and therefore we're going to have to be dependent on developing this product overseas or importing the product.
Have you had... I'm sorry to cut in. I thought you had concluded your point. Have you had conversations with your workers? And if so, how difficult a conversation that was?
Yeah, in fact, we haven't had conversations because the industry only goes back to work on the 13th of January. And it's going to be a difficult conversation. Fortunately, we have been forewarned about the situation. We've been working tirelessly over the past year to develop alternate sources. But as I previously indicated, there are just some products that we simply cannot procure from the alternate mills in South Africa. Again, in terms of metallurgical capability, there are very, very few mills. And in fact, the mills that the Department of Trade and Industry and the IDC, driven by the government, and more specifically Minister Patel, these can be described as mini mills, and tend to focus on a product range which is a lot less sophisticated and more simple in nature. Probably a good product to consider would be rebar or simple angles. And these products form very sort of average, mediocre technology type of products. But when it comes to the high-tech products that we require in the mining sector, or the high-tech products that we require in the automotive sector, the people with the capability at the moment, unfortunately, is ArcelorMittal, a combination of the Vereniging Works and Newcastle. And that is going to be a great loss. Again, as I said previously, it amounts to approximately 450,000 tons of steel that cannot and is not being made in the country.
Yeah.
SCORE is certainly upscaling, and so is Cape Gate and Unica, but it'll take time to get to that point, and certainly we're going to be confronted with a huge supply chain break, not only within my company, but across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, the automotive industry is reeling today because the automotive industry has worked very, very hard to develop local content. I mean, if you look at the OEMs that are here in the country at the moment, they've turned over every stone to get from 40% to 45% local content.
Yeah.
And overnight, some of the key products are just going to stop. I mean, a case in point is spring steel. That is a critical component that goes into the pickups, or buckies as we call it in South Africa. And it's not only a case of now losing the spring steel. Our steel is then integrated with the other components in the assembly. And so the knock-on effect is you suddenly lose the local axle, then you lose the shocks, and then you lose the full braking system. And before you know it, the losing of the spring steel represents 7% of the total vehicle cost.
Yeah.
And you know, the OEMs are under extraordinary pressure to keep local production. We've got the APDP program, which has been put in place to facilitate local production. And I can honestly see major OEMs, as they've indicated in the past, like Volkswagen has recently, and Toyota, and the rest of them, that every time a new model comes in, it's literally a marginal situation whether they continue manufacturing in South Africa or they look elsewhere.
Yeah.
And if we lose this critical steel capability, I'm so fearful that we lose big labor-oriented manufacturing when they relocate the manufacturing to other territories.
As you mentioned, this is an entire value chain that will likely be affected. And I know from the newspaper articles I've been reading that it is the towns of Newcastle, Vereniging, that will likely be impacted here, because that's where most of these factories or companies operate from. Do you believe that indeed those will be turned into ghost towns if this company eventually does shut down? Yeah.
Look, Zolly, Newcastle is essentially built around ArcelorMittal, and there is not that much secondary manufacturing that takes place in Newcastle itself. The steel mill is there, and you will lose 2,000 odd jobs or plus with the closure of Newcastle. Whereas the bulk of the steel beneficiation or secondary manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, takes place in the Gauteng areas. And yes, it'll have an impact on Vereniging as a town, but I think it'll have a profound impact on Gauteng as a whole.
Sure.
If you go back to the commentary of the 18 industry associations that have very, very good handle on their manufacturing capability in their various sectors. It wasn't a pie in the sky extraction of 100,000 jobs are going to be lost. It was based on a thorough analysis. So what we're going to see is 3,500 jobs lost to ArcelorMittal. We're going to see immediate impact of 30,000 jobs lost as various supply chains or subcategories or divisions of the fabrication companies close down. And then in the medium to long term, as OEMs don't renew the manufacturing of a particular motor car line, or the impact is just so dramatic that the local content isn't high enough, that the companies choose to relocate elsewhere. And collectively, you're looking at a minimum of 100,000 people that are going to lose their jobs. Wow. So that's just in terms of job losses. If you look at the economic impact of that and the deindustrialization that takes place as a consequence of that, I think if you take a long-term macro view on that, it's going to be far, far greater. Yeah. I mean, I always relate to and like to compare the Australian manufacturing base. I mean, I've been working in Australia for 35 years or trading in Australia, and 20 odd years ago, their manufacturing base was dynamic, and their technology base was very, very contemporary. And for various reasons, they decided not to continue supporting the automotive industry. When Toyota closed and Holden closed, it was dramatic, and you received initial sort of labor losses in the market. But in reality today, Australia has lost this wonderful technology base that they had. You could go to Australia and there were the equipment that you use to manufacture goods were made in Australia. Today, Australia is very much a mining nation, a tourism nation, agricultural nation, a service-based nation, but it's devoid of the hardcore manufacturing that they used to have. Yeah. And so with us losing this base load, my biggest fear is that we lose this technology base and we just drift towards a more service-based nation, which is not what we need. We need to be able to manufacture, and we need to employ our people. I mean, I don't have to tell you how many people are unemployed. I mean, within the youth, it's the most terrifying number if you start looking at the unemployment levels between 18 and 35. Absolutely. And you're certainly not going to achieve that through the service industry. We have to maintain our manufacturing. So the implications for this, of the closure of Newcastle for me is absolutely devastating. One, as a company, but two, as a South African, concerned about the long-term economic performance of our nation and the need to employ people. Very briefly, you've already painted the picture of what this is going to do for efforts to re-industrialize the South African economy. Finally, though, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition says it did try to intervene, but simply its efforts clearly were not enough. Do you believe that they did go the distance? It's very complex. If we look at Newcastle, Newcastle as a company or as a subsidiary of ArcelorMittal South Africa has been losing approximately 2 billion rand a year, and it's simply not sustainable. And you can fully understand the motivation to close it. I think we've got to applaud ArcelorMittal for maintaining the company and for the period of time that it has, given the variables that it's got to deal with. Newcastle logistically is in an obscure location today. But when Newcastle was set up in 1971, we had a dynamic logistics infrastructure in the form of the then South African railways. Yeah. And it could be serviced very, very efficiently, and from a cost point of view, it was not prohibitive at all relative today to take iron ore to that location and in turn relocate the finished product around the country. Today, with the tariffs that we face from Transnet, they're really pushing a rock uphill. Coupled with that, the blast furnace, which is very, very important in terms of steel making, because we've been able to export our steel around the world because we've got some of the purest and cleanest steel, and we have the capability to make very, very specialized steel. But unfortunately, a blast furnace is very, very energy intensive. You combine that with our ever-escalating electricity costs, it makes it very, very tough. Cherry on the top, and I suppose there are a couple of cherries in this case, is the world is awash with steel. It's been at the lowest level, pricing levels that we've seen for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
We've got an overcapacity of steel in South Africa. Minister Patel and his cohorts, for better or worse, facilitated the creation of a lot of additional steel capacity in South Africa. So we're sitting with excess steel capacity at the moment. And then similarly with the complex regulations that we've got in place in terms of exporting of scrap, effectively the steel mills that rely on electric arc furnaces are sitting with an extraordinary advantage at the moment, where the input material is significantly cheaper. So going back to your question, has the government done enough to resolve this problem? It's a very, very complex problem. And I don't think it's one that can be sorted out within a matter of minutes, days, or months. I think there's intent across the board to try and save the situation, but it's very, very difficult. I mean, I just jumping to another point that I touched on briefly, the world is awash with steel. I was looking at a report only yesterday from JP Morgan, and it shows that not a single steel mill out of China, and China is sitting with millions of tons of excess capacity, is actually trading at a profit at the moment. This particular report makes reference to rebar, but they're all trading at below cost.
Justin
and
Corbett,
it makes it, yes, sir.
Apologies to cut you off there, but thank you very much. I think the point is well made, that this is absolutely going to be devastating for the industry as a whole in South Africa. Justin Corbett, the CEO of Rand York, a joint CEO there, a steel manufacturing company.